The White House press briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-conference chatter, journalists adjusting their cameras, flipping through notes, and whispering about the latest political developments. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was about to take the podium, ready to address the day's questions. It had been a whirlwind of a year under President Donald Trump's second term, and the media scrutiny had only intensified. Every day was a battle, a test of wit and endurance. But Karoline was no stranger to the fire. At just 27, she had already made history as the youngest press secretary in American history. Critics underestimated her. They mocked her youth, her conservative values, and, more often than not, her faith. But Karoline never wavered. She walked to the podium with the confidence of a seasoned professional. Her crisp navy blue blazer neatly buttoned over a white blouse. Her golden hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders, and her usual delicate gold cross necklace, a cherished gift from her grandmother, was missing. The room quieted as she set down her notes and adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take your questions." The reporters raised their hands, eager to pounce on the latest policies. Karoline called on a few, answering questions about economic strategies, international relations, and the administration's stance on immigration. Then, from the middle of the room, a smirking voice interrupted. "Karoline," sneered Jim Sanderson, a senior reporter from the Washington Tribune, a notoriously left-leaning outlet, "I noticed you're not wearing your gold cross necklace today. Wasn't that your signature piece? Seems like faith was just a show for you." A murmur rippled through the room. Some reporters exchanged glances, while others leaned forward, waiting to see how she would respond. Karoline exhaled, her hands resting lightly on the podium. The insult was veiled as a question, but its intention was clear: to mock her, to insinuate that her Christian faith was performative, that it was merely a political prop. The press room grew still. This wasn't just an attack on her wardrobe choice. It was an attack on her character. She tilted her head slightly, her blue eyes locking onto Sanderson's with unshaken resolve. "Are we now questioning people's faith based on their accessories, Jim?" she asked coolly. "Because if that's the new standard for journalism, I'm afraid you're going to have to inspect every person in this room for religious consistency." A few quiet chuckles spread through the audience, but Jim Sanderson wasn't done. "So why didn't you wear it today?" he pressed, crossing his arms. Karoline gave a small, knowing smile. "I don't need to wear a cross around my neck to carry Christ in my heart." The room fell silent. Jim opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had expected her to stumble, to fumble for an explanation. Instead, she had disarmed him in a way he hadn't anticipated. But Karoline wasn't finished. "I didn't wear my necklace today because faith isn't a piece of jewelry. It's a way of life. And frankly, it's troubling that a member of the press is more interested in my personal expressions of faith than in, say, the state of the economy or foreign policy. Is this really what journalism has come to?" Another murmur passed through the room. Some reporters shifted uncomfortably, realizing the attack had backfired. Jim cleared his throat, clearly flustered. I just thought it was interesting, that's all." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "If you find my jewelry choices more interesting than the work we're doing for the American people, perhaps you should rethink your priorities." The room was silent, except for the rapid clicking of cameras capturing the moment. She glanced at the crowd, scanning the sea of faces. "Now, unless there are more pressing questions, ones that actually pertain to the business of running the country, I'd like to move on." Sanderson lowered his hand. He had been hoping for an easy headline, something to paint Karoline as a hypocrite. Instead, she had turned the moment into a lesson, and now he was the one looking foolish. A few moments of silence passed before another reporter spoke up. Yeah. Back to the foreign policy discussion, and just like that, the briefing moved on. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet. Karoline had stood her ground, but she knew this wasn't the last she'd hear of it. The media wouldn't let it slide so easily. And sure enough, by the evening, the headlines were ablaze. By the time Karoline Leavitt walked out of the press room, the storm had already begun. Within minutes, social media was flooded with clips of her exchange with Jim Sanderson. Conservative voices hailed her as a champion of faith, standing firm against media bias. Meanwhile, left-leaning pundits twisted the narrative, claiming she had dodged the question and was using her religion as a shield. On Twitter, hashtags like #faithfraud and #goldcrossgate started trending, fueled by commentators eager to turn a moment of strength into a scandal. The Washington Tribune wasted no time publishing an op-ed titled "Leavitt's Vanishing Cross," a symbol of conservative hypocrisy. The piece speculated on whether her faith was performative and accused her of pandering to Christian voters while failing to practice what she preached. Fox News, on the other hand, ran a counter-segment, "Fake Outrage? Media targets Leavitt for not wearing a necklace," highlighting the absurdity of the attack. Karoline sighed as she scrolled through the endless takes. It was exhausting but not surprising. She had expected backlash. The media had always been relentless when it came to conservatives who wore their faith proudly. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "Mom, proud of you, honey. Don't let the noise get to you." She smiled softly before another notification popped up. This one was from a White House staffer. "Staffer, Trump wants to see you in the Oval. ASAP." Karoline straightened, took a deep breath, and grabbed her blazer. This meeting wasn't just about damage control. She could feel it in her gut. The Oval Office was bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. President Donald Trump sat behind the resolute desk, flipping through a stack of papers. As Karoline stepped inside, he looked up and grinned. Well, if it isn't the woman of the hour." Karoline chuckled softly. "I take it you saw the press briefing?" Trump leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Saw it? Karoline, you broke the internet. That was one of the best smackdowns I've seen since I took office. Both times." She let out a small laugh, but he wasn't finished. "Listen," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "The media's gonna keep coming after you. They hate when strong conservatives fight back, especially when they can't control the narrative." "I know," she said. "It's just frustrating. They act like faith is some costume we put on for political points." Trump nodded. "That's because they don't get it. To them, religion is a prop. To us, it's real. And that scares them." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "Look, I want you to go on Hannity tonight. Set the record straight." She hesitated. "Are you sure that's the right move? Won't it just add fuel to the fire?" Trump smirked. "That's the point. When they come for us, we don't run, we double down. You've got the whole country watching. Give them something to remember." Karoline took a deep breath. "All right, let's do it." Trump grinned. "That's what I like to hear." As she walked out of the Oval Office, she knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was about to start. That evening, Karoline sat in the green room at the Fox News studios in Washington, D.C. The walls were lined with framed photos of past interviews, a testament to the network's history of high-stakes conversations. A makeup artist made the final touches to her foundation as a producer handed her an earpiece. "2 minutes, Ms. Leavitt," he said. She nodded, exhaling slowly. This wasn't her first time on Hannity, but tonight's segment carried more weight than usual. The left-wing media had spent the last few hours fueling the controversy, and this was her chance to take control of the narrative. As the countdown ticked away, she reminded herself of Trump's words, "We don't run, we double down." The screen in front of her flickered to life, revealing Sean Hannity at his desk. His familiar, confident voice filled the air. "Tonight, we have White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt joining us live." "Karoline, great to have you back on the show." She smiled. "Thanks, Sean. Always good to be here." Hannity wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. So, today's press briefing took an interesting turn. A so-called journalist decided that your missing gold cross necklace was more important than, say, inflation, border security, or foreign policy. What was going through your mind in that moment? Karoline sighed, folding her hands. "Sean, I'll be honest, this wasn't surprising. The mainstream media has been attacking conservatives for years, but what they really hate is faith. And they especially hate when people in positions of influence actually live by their faith instead of just talking about it." Hannity nodded. "Exactly. But let's be clear, you didn't dodge the question. You made an incredibly powerful point. I don't need to wear a cross to carry Christ in my heart. That line has been blowing up all over social media. She chuckled. Well, it's true. Faith isn't a fashion statement. It's not about what you wear. It's about how you live. And frankly, I find it disturbing that a journalist would use a missing piece of jewelry as an excuse to question someone's sincerity in their beliefs. Hannity leaned forward. But that's the left's strategy, isn't it? They want to discredit anyone who doesn't conform to their worldview. They attack you personally because they can't win on the issues. Karoline nodded. Absolutely. They do it to all of us. They mock Christians, but they'd never dare question someone of a different faith the same way. It's a double standard, and it's time people start calling it out. Hannity smirked. Well, you certainly called it out today. Now, let me ask you this, how has the White House responded? Has President Trump spoken to you about this? Karoline smiled. I actually met with him earlier today. His message was simple. When they come for us, we don't back down. Hannity grinned. That sounds like classic Trump. Because it is, she said. And I completely agree with him. We won't apologize for our faith. We won't let the media intimidate us. And we won't be shamed into silence. Hannity nodded. Well said. Karoline, thank you for being here tonight. She smiled. Thanks, Sean. The screen faded to black as the show cut to commercial. Karoline removed her earpiece and let out a breath. The battle wasn't over. But she had made one thing clear. She wasn't going anywhere. The moment Karoline Leavitt's interview with Sean Hannity aired, the internet erupted. On one side, conservative Americans flooded social media with messages of support. Clips of her response to Jim Sanderson and her defiant stance on Hannity went viral, earning millions of views within hours. Hashtags like #FaithOverFear and #StandWithCaroline trended on X, formerly Twitter, with people praising her courage. But the opposition wasn't backing down. Mainstream media outlets doubled down on their attacks, accusing her of playing the victim. CNN ran a panel discussion with political analysts who dismissed the controversy as a manufactured outrage by conservatives. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow opened her segment with a smirk. Folks, apparently, the biggest issue facing America today isn't the economy or foreign policy. It's whether or not a government spokesperson wore a necklace. The audience chuckled as she continued. It's almost impressive how quickly conservatives turn anything into a culture war. The New York Times ran an op-ed titled, Karoline Leavitt's Faith Playbook, How the Right Uses Religion to Avoid Accountability. In the piece, the author wrote, Leavitt's response was a masterclass in conservative deflection. Instead of answering a simple question, she turned herself into a martyr. The reality is that politicians like her use religion as a tool, not a belief system, to maintain their power. But despite the media's coordinated attacks, Karoline remained unfazed. Inside the White House, her phone buzzed with messages of encouragement from Republican leaders, pastors, and everyday Americans. One text stood out. Senator Josh Hawley. America needs more people like you, Karoline. The left is afraid of faith because they don't understand it. Keep standing strong. She smiled. Faith wasn't just something she carried. It was something millions of Americans shared. But as the news cycle raged on, she realized this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about something bigger. The media wasn't just attacking her necklace. They were attacking faith itself. The next morning, Karoline sat in the West Wing, sipping her coffee as she skimmed through the latest headlines. The backlash from liberal media was expected, but what surprised her was the growing support from religious leaders. She received calls from pastors, priests, and even rabbis who saw through the media's agenda. Prominent Christian leaders spoke out in her defense, emphasizing that faith isn't about symbols, it's about values. One message in particular caught her attention. It was an email from Reverend Thomas Parker, a well-respected pastor from Texas. Subject: They're coming for all of us. Dear Karoline, I watched what happened at the press briefing, and I want you to know you are not alone. This is not just an attack on you. It is an attack on millions of Americans who hold their faith dear. The media mocks Christianity because they see it as a threat. They believe that if they can silence one of us, they can silence all of us. But they are wrong. We are praying for you. Keep fighting the good fight. Blessings, Reverend Thomas Parker. Karoline sat back in her chair, letting the words sink in. She had spent years fighting battles in the political arena, but this was different. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was spiritual warfare. She closed her laptop and picked up her phone. It was time to take this fight beyond the press room. It was time to rally the people. 2 days after the press briefing controversy, Karoline Leavitt stood backstage at a packed auditorium in Dallas, Texas. The event, quickly organized by conservative and faith-based groups, was originally meant to be a small gathering, but the response had been overwhelming. Over 10,000 people had shown up, waving American flags and holding signs that read, "Faith is not a costume," and "We stand with Karoline." The energy in the room was electric. She glanced down at her phone. A new text had just come in. President Trump. Big crowd. Big energy. Give them the truth. She smiled. A moment later, the event organizer tapped her on the shoulder. "You're up." Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted in applause, chants of USA, USA, echoing through the massive space. She raised her hand, signaling for quiet, and then began speaking. "A few days ago, a reporter questioned my faith because I wasn't wearing a gold cross necklace. He implied that my belief in God was just for show." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "Let me be clear. I do not need to wear a cross around my neck to carry Christ in my heart." Thunderous applause. "But this isn't just about me. This is about all of us. This is about the millions of Americans who are mocked for their beliefs. It's about the teachers who are told they can't pray in their classrooms. It's about the students who are told they can't talk about God at school. It's about the workers who are told to keep their faith to themselves." People nodded, some raising their hands in agreement. The media and the radical left want to make faith a thing of the past. They want us to be silent, to be afraid, to conform. But I have news for them. Our faith is stronger than their lies. Our faith is not a political tool. It is who we are. The crowd roared in approval. She continued, her voice steady. "We don't apologize for our faith. We don't hide it. And we will never be ashamed of standing for God, for our country, and for our values." A standing ovation swept through the auditorium. Some in the crowd were even in tears. Karoline stepped back for a moment, overwhelmed by the support. This wasn't just a speech. It was a movement. As Karoline's speech spread across social media, leftist media outlets went into full damage control. CNN called it a dangerous escalation of Christian nationalism. The New York Times ran another hit piece. From press briefings to pulpits, how Karoline Leavitt is using religion to build a political army. MSNBC's Joy Reid ranted on her show. "This is exactly what we've been warning about, the rise of right-wing extremists using Christianity to push their political agenda." Karoline Leavitt isn't a press secretary anymore. She's a religious zealot. The White House, however, was not backing down. Trump's campaign released a statement. The media's attacks on Karoline Leavitt are not just attacks on her. They are attacks on every American who values faith and freedom. "We will never apologize for standing with God." Fox News ran headlines like, "The War on Christianity, How the Left is Targeting Faith in America." The battle lines were being drawn. This was no longer just a controversy. It was a full-blown cultural war. Karoline Leavitt woke up to an inbox overflowing with messages. Some were from political allies, others from everyday Americans, churchgoers, small business owners, students. All of them had one thing in common. They were tired of being ridiculed for their faith. One email stood out. It was from a high school student in Ohio named Rachel. Subject: "Thank you for standing up. Dear Ms. Leavitt, I saw what happened at the press briefing, and I just wanted to say thank you. I'm 17, and I've always been afraid to talk about my faith at school because every time I do, I get weird looks or get called names. When I saw how you responded, I realized I don't have to be afraid anymore. If you can stand up for God in front of the entire country, then I can stand up for him in my own school. Thank you for giving me courage. Rachel. Karoline sat back, exhaling deeply. This was why she fought. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about headlines. It was about people, real Americans who felt abandoned, mocked, and silenced. She picked up her phone and called her communications director. We need to take this national, she said. Her team immediately sprang into action. Over the next 48 hours, they scheduled interviews, arranged town halls, and connected with pastors and community leaders across the country. The message was simple. Faith is not a liability. It's our greatest strength. Churches began holding special services in solidarity. Conservative influencers flooded social media with messages of support. Faith-based groups launched a campaign called We Won't Be Silenced, encouraging Christians to share their stories. What had started as an attack on Karoline had turned into something far bigger. It was a national awakening. 1 week after the controversy began, Karoline walked back into the White House press briefing room. The atmosphere was different this time. The reporters were more cautious. Even Jim Sanderson sat quietly, his usual smirk replaced with uncertainty. She stepped to the podium, adjusting the microphone. Before we begin, I'd like to say something. Silence filled the room. I've spent the last week watching the media twist my words, mock my faith, and try to turn this into a scandal. Let me make something very clear. I will never apologize for believing in God, and I will never let the press or anyone else dictate what faith should look like. She glanced around, making sure every journalist was listening. Faith is not a prop. It's not a political strategy. It's the foundation of who we are as a nation. And if the media has a problem with that, well, that's their problem, not mine. She let the words sink in. A few seconds passed before a voice from the back of the room called out, Ms. Leavitt, does this mean you'll be wearing your cross necklace again? She smiled. I don't need to wear a cross to prove my faith. But since you're so concerned, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the gold necklace, holding it up for the cameras. The flashbulbs exploded as she fastened it around her neck. Does this make you feel better? She asked, raising an eyebrow. The room was silent. Jim Sanderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. She had made her point, and she had left them speechless. Karoline Leavitt's defiance ignited something across the country. Churches saw a rise in attendance. More Americans began speaking openly about their faith. The left-wing media tried to move on, but the movement refused to die. As for Karoline, she continued standing firm, knowing that every battle she fought wasn't just for herself.